Alrighty, bro amigos, welcome to the ninth edition of the Florida East Coast Railway FEC Friday. We're going to start off this video with a new spot. I found this spot. It's, I think, 3 miles north of Otis Stonehunter, which is one of my go-to spots. This is the Henderson grade. And if you see on the map, what I like about this spot is it's got a couple industries that the locals service, and it's got a bunch of shade, in this time of the year in Florida, the shade is nice. It's a lot less scorching for my skin as I wait and sweat for trains to come by. And while I was waiting, FEC Railway came by with their
Master Claw chooses who will go and who will stay.
With their claw, and so I watched them unload some brand new concrete ties. So obviously they have some plans to replace and do some maintenance along this section. I don't know when they're going to do it. I don't know if they do it during the day or at night or whatever break they have between locals and main lines, but if I can try to catch it, I will for y'all. But anyways, I did catch 905 this morning. It was led by GP40-2, number 431. So this morning, 905 would be working the Vulcan Materials location about 5 miles south of here. And as I arrived on location to film that process, a northbound mainline freight was coming across the crossing and taking the siding. So the reason why the northbound actually had to take the siding and not the local, which is normal, customary with railroad operations, is because 905 was already tying up the main while it was working the Vulcan Materials Industrial Spur. The Vulcan Materials Industrial Spur is tied into the main line, so it was just easier for them to route the northbound train into the siding and around 905 so 905 can continue its work, and the northbound could continue heading towards Jacksonville. So this northbound train normally travels a little bit faster through this section. This is the start of what you consider the Moultrie Cutoff. The Moultrie Cutoff is a FEC mainline realignment project that occurred in 1925. And so the original FEC mainline, as it exited St. Augustine, traveled in a southwesterly direction towards East Palatka before curving back to the southeast and connecting with Bunnell. FEC figured out it could save 20 miles of trackage by making the cutoff, and thus saving time and money routing trains that way. They kept the old main line in service as the Palatka branch, and it even had a Palatka spur that connected East Palatka to Palatka, but that spur was abandoned in 1950, and then the section between East Palatka and Bunnell was abandoned in 1972. This section between East Palatka and Hastings, which is a small little community outside of St. Augustine, stayed intact until 1983. Before that section was abandoned. There is still a section of the old original FEC main line that is still in operation, as obviously as the Wilbur Industrial Spur. I believe, Wilbur Wright Industrial Spur, and they have a couple of customers that they service, one being Titan and the other one being 84 Lumber. So as I previously mentioned, this being the southern terminus of the Moultrie Cutoff, off to the right and off camera you can actually still see remnants of the old original FEC mainline grade as it went towards East Palatka. With it being 50 years since the line was abandoned, you can imagine it is overgrown. But as you can see from this satellite photo, you can see the clear delineation in the trees of where the line used to run and how it follows along County Road 13 as it heads towards Espanola. Once you get past Espanola, though, it's hard to make out where the grade used to be. But on this section, it is still clearly visible, and you can see the roadbed However, there are no rails or ties or any other artifacts that I could see, but I thought it was interesting. But anyways, we'll get back to watching 905 as 905 takes the switch to go run around its train, come back and shove in the loads and take the empties back north towards Jacksonville. So Locomotive 431 is what I like to call a born and raised Florida East Coast locomotive. It was actually built brand new for the Florida East Coast back in December of 1984, though it looked slightly different when it rolled out of the factory. At that time, it was sporting the FEC going places, or as I like to call it and other rail fans like to call it, the Hurricane paint scheme. And it also had class lights and a oscillating gyro light in the nose. But as it being 40 years old, it's gone through a few different iterations of paint schemes. It's even had the addition of barricade stripes. But then it's also had the removal of the barricade stripes, the gyro light, and the class lights as ditch lights have become more prevalent. With FEC now being owned by Grupo Mexico, 431 has actually gone through another iteration of paint scheme and is now in a new paint scheme, which some have affectionately called the beach towel scheme. So while the crew of 431 was doing their thing, I kind of moved around a bit to see if I could find any other vantage points to kind of get a better view of what they're doing. Fortunately, with this area and a lot of the woods, there is not many access roads to get close to where their work was without violating any kind of legal trespassing issues. So this was the best shot I could get right here, was through this gap in the fence. And as you can see, they've already dropped off the loads, and I can only guess that they were back on the main line, hooking up to the empties and pumping up the air. Luckily for me, I didn't have to wait long, and a few minutes later, we can see 431 heading north with its empties, running long hood forward, heading towards Jacksonville. So I did decide that I was going to try to chase 905 north to Jacksonville to see if I could catch 905 working any of the other industries along the line, because there are quite a few industries between here and Jacksonville. However, before I could get all my stuff packed up, I did notice this high rail truck come up the line, and it happened to be the same high rail truck that I observed in the last video. And it looks like they're doing some more inspections, getting ready for some maintenance away projects that are coming up. As you saw in the beginning of the video, they are positioning these new concrete ties along the line to do so. So by the time I packed all my stuff up and caught back up with 9 to 5, apparently 9 to 5 had stopped somewhere and set off a few cars. And so when I finally caught up to him, he was down to 3 hoppers. And I have no idea where he set the other ones at. But this would be the end of my chase for today. So the next morning I ventured out back to the Henderson grade spot again and caught this morning northbound. I believe it's going to be train 202 heading north towards Jacksonville. And I would chase this one as well and catching it again in St. Augustine as it rounded the curve of the San Sebastian River. So after catching 202 in St. Augustine, I decided to move north towards Jacksonville. And instead of just chasing 202 up US 1 into Bowdoin Yard, I decided to see if I could catch some interchange traffic on the FEC line as it goes across the St. Johns River. And as you can see here, the CSX headquarters is also over here. And it's kind of a pretty neat skyline to see. However, due to having adulting responsibilities with kids and stuff like that, I was not able to sit there for more than an hour. So unfortunately, when I got there, the bridge was up and there was no signs of any interchange traffic to or from either side of the river. However, it wasn't a total loss, so even though I didn't get to see any trains during the hour, I did get to see these potted dolphins. And while I was there, they started playing. So it wasn't a total loss. Obviously, I would love to have seen some FEC trains or even maybe some NS trains come across. But watching these dolphins play with each other and kind of swim around, do their thing was actually still a win-win for me. I've always had a kind of a thing and fascination with dolphins as well. So while it wasn't the thing I came out towards, it was still a good day. And before anyone asks, no, I'm definitely not a marine biologist, so I know even less about dolphins than I do about trains. But I do believe these are bottlenose dolphins based on the color and based on the facial structure that I was able to see as they were coming for air. I do believe these are bottlenose dolphins. However, if any marine biologists do also happen to be train nerds and are watching this video, please enlighten us if I am wrong, or if you have any more information on what they're doing. They seem to be playing, and maybe they're hunting, I'm not sure. But it's pretty cool to watch. So even though that minivan kind of ruined my first shot of 105, I chased 105 down to Ormond Beach and caught it here again at the Tomoka River Bridge in Ormond Beach. So the next morning I went back to my tried and true Otis Stonehunter Road spot, and we caught 204 heading north towards Jacksonville. So back at the Henderson grade crossing, I would catch 107 heading south in the evening of September 1st, and I would be pleasantly surprised that 107 would also have the ATIV, or automatic track inspection vehicle, attached to it, which is the old SD40-2 that they converted into a geometry car. It used to be, I believe, FEC number 719. So the next morning, while on the way to drop the kid off at daycare, I checked on the hardwood siding in Favoretta, which is the north end of the siding, and I was pleasantly surprised to see a green light on the siding, which indicated there was going to be some local action coming. And while I was there, I did also see some maintenance away trucks for FEC come. It looked like they were about to start working on the switch, but not before 910 comes running up the track to do a runaround movement. 910, I think, serves a couple industries just south of the hardwood siding, and the hardwood siding is the easiest way for it to park its consist and run around it. So due to having my 1-year-old daughter in the car with me and how quickly she gets impatient, I didn't actually have time to come chase and stalk 910 this morning to see who exactly 910 was servicing. But from what I gather, I believe 910 was servicing the Halifax Paving Company, which is down in Ormond Beach, which is just a few miles south of here. So likely they were bringing a load of aggregate or crushed rock to the paving company, and they probably had to park the consist on the siding and run around it just so they could bring it back and then shove it into the spur. So after dropping my daughter off at daycare, I decided to check the Henderson grade signals on my way home, and as my luck would have it, they would also have a green signal. As I turned to look down the tracks, I could see the faint headlight of 905 coming. And as it turns out today, it looks like 905 not only will be servicing Vulcan, but it looks like they had some loads for some other customers as well, because they had a boxcar and a tank car mixed in to consist as well. And for the final shot for this week's episode, we are going to return to downtown Bunnell, and we're going to catch what I believe to be is train 202 heading north towards Jacksonville.